Hello and welcome back to another video, and today we're going to be going over my thoughts in a sort of review of Final Fantasy XIV Endwalker, the end of the saga. There's a lot to get into here, so I'm not going to mess around too much. All I'll say is please do like the video if you like the video, and subscribe as well. It's free, helps me out an absolute ton, so I'd appreciate that. But let's get straight into the video. Kind of hard to think about where to even start. Because this is the end of a saga, and I guess it's the end of a 10-year story. And I guess the initial question is, does it deliver? And the short answer to that is absolutely it does. In fact, I think it over delivers. I think it outdid my expectations, and my expectations were ridiculously high. Final Fantasy XIV Endwalker is an outstanding achievement, truly a breakout achievement in video games that will be remembered and celebrated for years to come. It is a true unique experience that I'm so glad that I decided to take on. Having said that, there's a few minor gripes that I have with the Endwalker, but we'll get into that. So I'm also going to add, before we get right into it, that this will be as spoiler-free as it can be, just because I know this is a new expansion and new players are going to be looking at videos like this, so I may do a spoilery story discussion later in another video. If you want that, let me know in the comments. But yes, let's get into this right now. And the first thing I want to speak about is the new features. So they added a new feature within the quests that are companion quests, where essentially you will have an NPC character following you around as you go around your business in the quest. And there'll be certain areas where you can stop and speak to this character, and they'll give you information about the quest, and also you can ask them like optional questions as well, which gives you a little bit of information about what the characters are thinking and feeling at that point in time, and a little bit of extra narrative information. So this added a lot of immersion for me, and I thought this was a great addition and a great idea, and I do hope they continue to build upon this. I think this is a great decision to put into the game. It kind of reminds me of like older Final Fantasies, where you get into a bit like a hub area and you could speak to your party members and stuff, and they're just like although they'll just give you some dialogue that is much like their character, and it just adds a little bit to the experience, and I think that's a great idea, and I'm very glad that they added it. Next up is solo instances in this game are the best they've ever been. It really stands out from kind of like the questing in the world like you normally do. I think they're very well designed. I think there's a lot of great variety in them as well. They've really stepped up from Shadowbringers. Like, there are not just your normal kind of like fight the bosses until you get through it. There are like stealthy ones and different ones with different objectives, and they feel they're very much part of the story, and they really add to the experience. So the solo instances, there are a fair few in Endwalker, and they are all, in my opinion, absolutely outstanding. I should also mention, like, obviously, because I'm trying not to be spoilery, this is going to be I'm not going to be able to go into a massive amount of detail, but anyway, visuals for this game, the graphics and the environments, I think, and the armor sets and everything are the best looking visuals by far. And we even have, from a recent live letter, that there are going to be visual upgrades coming in the future, I think in 7.0. So it's going to get even better, but I thought Endwalker, a lot of the zones looked absolutely brilliant. I thought Mare Lamentorium, aka the Moon, looks brilliant. I thought the lighting design was fantastic, and obviously sky and everything was really nice. Charlian looks amazing. It looks like a real ancient Greek city. Really looks like a place for academics. And also, of course, Radz-at-Han and the surrounding areas, like the colour palette they chose, the vibrancy, the saturation of that zone was beautiful. It was really beautiful. So yes, I think the visuals are noticeably better, and I think they've done the best that they can do with what they have. Obviously, barring the upgrades that are coming soon. But I think, yeah, it's the best that they could possibly do with it, or with what they have and the time they had to do it in. And I think they've done a fantastic job making an older game look so good. Now, we're going to go into dungeons and trials. So there's not as many dungeons and trials as there were in Shadowbringers, and there's certainly not as many as there were in Heaven's Ward, Stormblood, and definitely not Realm Reborn. There's not that many at all. But I would have to say that I think they are near enough the best that they've made. I do think mostly the Dark Inside, which is a dungeon that you do at the very end of Endwalker, is my favourite dungeon I've done so far. Out of all of them, I think it was brilliantly done, brilliantly designed. I can't really tell you why. You just have to wait. I mean, if you played it, you know, but if you're not, you have to wait until you get there. I do recommend that when you're playing through the dungeons for the first time, you go through it using the trust system, because much like with doing the companion quests, you get dialogue from the Scions that adds to the kind of the immersion and the narrative experience. Yes, it does take longer than with a party of players, and obviously if you die, you have to start all over again. You can't get battle rest, but still I do think it is absolutely worth it, especially if you play a DPS like I do. And trust me, there are going to be points in time during the Endwalker quests where you're going to want to use the trust system. You're going to want to play with the characters. I'm not going to say why, but you're definitely going to want to. Yeah, I say there are some, although there weren't many, I think it was definitely a situation of quality over quantity, and I think they knocked it out of the park once again. Okay, and now I want to speak about characters. So, over the arc of the Hydaelyn and Zodiac saga, we've had a huge amount of character development. Now, within the Scions, there's not a huge amount of character development, because obviously we're at the end of the arc, so why would there be? There wouldn't be more. We've kind of gone through that with them. Obviously there'll be more over the next arc, but you know what I mean. But I do think they all get their fair amount of time. I don't think there was anyone who was prioritized over anybody else. I think we do spend a lot of time with each and every Scion in the way that the quests are designed. You'll go off and spend time with this one and this one and this one. I do really enjoy Alisaie in this expansion, and the voice acting generally was brilliant by everyone in the cast. It usually is, I mean it always is, ever since Heaven's Ward, and yes, every voice actor in this game delivers as they normally do, but I do like that we got to spend a lot of time with everyone, and we got to have those moments where the game kind of slows down and we just get to spend time with the characters for the purpose of just, seeing their relationships with each other. That does happen a few times, and I always relish those moments in the game, and it's happened before, and it reminds me of kind of when you're camping and stuff in Final Fantasy 15, those moments in that game really made the game what it was, and it really adds to the Endwalker story as well. There was a very good arc, I thought, for Fortuno Levelure, which is Alisaie and Alphinaud's father, especially seeing how, I can't really go into detail, but there was a great development for his character. And also, I have to mention Xenos and Fandaniel also had great performances, and I think are some of the best villains ever written, really. And I think, are they up there with Emmett? I think that's up for opinion. I'm not entirely sure, but I do think that you could have that conversation, and I think that just shows how well they were. I love Xenos as a villain. I think he does really well, and I enjoy how he always tries to portray himself as your mirror. I enjoy that a lot. And that is a theme in Endwalker, and obviously he's done that before, so I don't think that's a spoiler. But all of the villains did a fantastic job at making me want to overcome them. But again, as they do in previous expansions, they also make every villain is very much, no one is purely evil. Everyone has that side that you can relate to, and everyone is kind of humanized in a way, and you will empathize with them, and you will see their way of thinking. And they do a really, really good job with that, with the villains in this expansion. there is never ever black and white. Final Fantasy XIV is definitely never not in Endwalker, definitely not. Okay, and now we're going to move on to talking about something that we all know was going to be good, and that's the soundtrack. Of course, it was brilliant. We know that it was brilliant. Soken is a genius, and we don't really need to spend too much time talking about the soundtrack because we know it was going to be good. I mean, obviously, like the themes that in Sharlayan just really suit the area, and I think all of the music throughout all of the dungeons and all of the zones were brilliant. And I really enjoyed the iterations, all the alterations they did to Answers, which is Hydaelyn's theme, which is the song that plays at the start of the A Realm Reborn cinematic. I enjoyed those a lot, and the song that's played at the end, or very much towards the end of the Endwalker expansion, I really enjoyed as well. And now we'll move on to the main event, I suppose, which is talking about the story. Now, obviously, as I said, I'm going to try and keep this spoiler-free, so I can't go into a massive amount of detail. But as I said at the start of the video, they really do deliver, and I think this is probably the best expansion story they've done. I do think, again, this, much like Shadowbringers, could have been its own single-player Final Fantasy game in itself. There is more than enough there for this to be a whole single-player game. Just this expansion, I mean, not the whole thing. Words that I think of when I think of the Endwalker story is it's masterful, it's wonderful, depressing, inspiring. Again, it really does give you the whole kind of spectrum of emotions throughout the entire thing. And I think, as I was talking about single-player games, I think we should be very grateful that Final Fantasy XIV is an MMO, allowing that long-term storytelling that wouldn't be possible in a single-player game. Like, there's no way that they'll be able to give us this much if this wasn't an MMO with expansions, with continued characters. Which is, I think, why they have managed to do this with just good planning, good writing, good consistency. They've pulled off something fantastic. Towards the end of the game, I'm not much of an outwardly emotional person, but if you go back and you watch my reaction to the end of Endwalker, obviously spoilers, if you've not done it, don't watch it yet, but I do get emotional at that, and nothing makes me do that, and I think it's usually it's probably the only game that has ever made me like outwardly emotional, and I think that is a testament to how much it achieves. And that's just a testament for me to how much it got me to connect to the game and how much it got me to connect to the characters. I mean, I've been fully immersed in other games before, but nothing to the extent of this, where I do truly care about this world and the characters within it enough to actually get like properly emotional from it. But now we're going to go into the story, and I do think the story does start slow, but I do think it needs to. Like, we've come off from a big high of the end of Shadowbringers, and you know, it's a long story and you can't just go flying through it at breakneck speed. I thought Garlemald was a fascinating zone, and one of my standout zones throughout the entire game. Seeing how the Warrior of Light and the Scions are portrayed through the eyes of the Garleans was fascinating. Kind of like the propaganda that was used and the things that the Garleans said about us, or what we were. Very familiar to propaganda that was used in history, in real life. I thought was fascinating, and that story was really dark and in places and very brutal, but I think it was very well done. I love that. Well, I did really enjoy, or I was fascinated by being in Garlemald and looking around and finally going to that place that we've heard about for so long, and it does again deliver in terms of the amount of intrigue it fulfills. Well, every zone has its own personality, its own characters that you will remember from those zones. And as I said, the story is not afraid to be brutal when it needs to be. It's not scared to, like, there are moments where I thought something was going to happen but it wasn't going to show it, but then it did. And it's not afraid to to do that to to us, the player. Now there are a couple of, I'd say, pacing issues. The one that sticks out, you kind of at the start, there are some lulls, and kind of the penultimate chapter there was as well, because obviously, like, we're dealing with the final days, and obviously there's a lot of urgency to what we're needing to accomplish, but then there's moments where we're helping people sell fish and explaining how water towers work, and it's kind of like, was this absolutely necessary? Like, I understand why we did it within the story, and it does link to other things, but I don't know, could that have been done in a different way? I'm not entirely sure. Possibly, possibly not. It's not a huge gripe, of course. And also, one thing that sticks out is obviously in the penultimate chapter, where we're coming towards the end of what we need to achieve. In the penultimate chapter, where we're kind of like really building towards the end. And then there's kind of like a lull in what we're doing, but then it's also playing the same sort of like 30-second to a minute loop of music, and it's also very urgent music. And obviously hearing the same loop of music over and over again is kind of annoying, but also that the music doesn't kind of thematically fit what we're kind of doing in that moment was a bit odd, but again, that's obviously quite nitpicky. It wasn't a big deal, of course, but yeah, that was one thing that kind of pulled me out a little bit. But that's essentially it. That's those couple of, like, the pacing issues and the loop of music was kind of literally my only sort of negative thoughts about the whole expansion. And nothing's perfect, of course, but we had, the story has excellent payoffs, excellent character payoffs. There's no questions left unanswered in terms of the scions, the questions we get from the scions. There's also, we know in 6.1 there's going to be a side quest where we're going to get a bit more for the other characters as well. In my opinion, I thought the ending was absolutely perfect. I wouldn't have changed any way of finishing it. I thought the final sequence, the kind of 2 hours, the final 2 hours was just brilliant. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. They did it perfectly, and I cannot tell you why, because I'm trying to make this spoiler free, but the ending was, in my opinion, perfect. And one thing that I wanted to mention before I wrap the video up, and this is going to be quite difficult to talk about without being spoilery, so I'm going to tread my words carefully, and I'm not going to be able to go into too much detail, but perhaps in another video I will. But what I really, really enjoyed from this is how this expansion deals with themes that affect every person on the planet. How it deals with those existential thoughts, which is something that I think every person has had at some point. Every single person had those existential thoughts of how and why we are even here. And that is the thing that I think is really well done within Endwalker and with Final Fantasy XIV generally, is you can relate to this story and you can relate to these characters somehow, as long as you exist. And it's assuming that you're watching this, I'm assuming you do exist. But if you exist and you're a human being, you can relate to the story in some way. And those existential thoughts can be very hard for people, but I think they tackle them in a very good way. And it's that feeling of, you know, despite not knowing and never knowing what can come, despite not knowing what could happen in the future, or what if anything is next, finding their purpose, finding their reason, finding their ways to carry on, and doing that despite everything coming to an end. And I think we as humans have all done that in a way, and the characters in this game do that. And I don't know many games who really deal with that kind of universal theme that I think everyone has thought about at least a little bit at some point. I've not known anything to do that before, and especially not to do it this well. And if you're kind of worried, like you don't really like thinking about stuff like that, and trust me, I get you. Don't be worried, because it does it in a really good way. And in fact, I would, if you do struggle with those thoughts, I would actually recommend you play it, because I think it will help. I think it will help you kind of work through them. To be able to deal with existential thoughts that everybody relates to and deal with them well. To be able to have all your characters' story arcs finish and pay off. To be able to have an incredible ending that over-delivers, fantastic story and character building all the way through. A couple of issues here and there, but other than that, this is masters of storytelling at work. It is an example of perfect long-term storytelling. Endwalker delivers on everything and more. I think, in my opinion, Final Fantasy XIV Endwalker has cemented itself as an artistic achievement. Firmly cemented itself as an artistic achievement in all of media, not just in games, but especially in games, but not just in games. There is nothing that's ever done anything like this before, and I think the only thing that will be able to do it again is Final Fantasy XIV. I don't see anybody else being able to deliver this kind of narrative, long-term storytelling to this quality through a video game. Final Fantasy XIV Endwalker is a narrative masterpiece. It is an experience that I would recommend to everyone who is willing to take on the journey, and I recommend it to you if you are willing to take on the journey. I encourage you all to begin your Final Fantasy XIV journeys if you haven't already. And this is something I've been thinking about for a while, but not entirely sure, but Endwalker confirms to me that Final Fantasy XIV fits firmly at the top of my list of the best game I have ever played in my life. And that is where I will end the video. Did you agree? Did you disagree? Let me know in the comments below. If you haven't played yet, I've got some beginner guides and stuff on the channel that can help you get started, so please do check those out. And if you have any questions on anything, also do put those in the comments below. But I hope you enjoyed that video. If you liked it, give it a like and subscribe if you have not already. And I hope to see you in the next one. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Thank you.